Welcome to the Let Me Save You 25 Years podcast, where we break down a new Shawnism each week. Each one of these is a little lesson I've learned along the way in hopes that you can maybe learn from my mistakes and build great things even bigger, better, and faster than I ever did, perhaps shaving off a decade or two on your own journey. Like it, follow this podcast, please. Share it out with a friend, wherever you listen to podcasts. We are there. My book, called Let Me Save You 25 Years, where today's topic comes from, is intentionally really short. So think of this podcast as the long version of the book, where we can go even deeper into the Shawnisms that each chapter of that book is based on. Just like our epic topic today, keep one hand on the now and one hand on the next. Because I didn't, and I paid the price for it. Man. I'll read you the first line from the book. While it is admirable to be willing to fix machines, fill sacks, or sweep floors, we must find a way to somehow be all in on the task at hand, even while keeping the other hand on the next chapter as well, or face the consequences. Either a myopic focus on today's problems or a myopic focus on our imagined future with no regard to reality will lead us down dead-end roads. Man, did I find this out the hard way. Oh my gosh. It was so bad. We completed the order. We back in the day, took this order for 12,000 little sacks from this big retailer when it was just me and my buddies and this like grain grinder shredder. We collected $250,000 in payment, having spent $250,000 making the order. We broke even. And it was because, look, 9/11 had happened while we were in the factory. The price of foam went up. The price of delivery went up. Everything that went wrong could have gone wrong. And while we should have made a tidy little profit on this first giant order we had and then invested that into the future of the business, we broke even. So here I am with crazy credit card debt. I'm 24 years old. Didn't even make enough to pay off all the credit cards. And we don't know what to do. And I had been in the factory stuffing sacks. So my hands are stained blue from stuffing these stupid little, 12,000 little sacks for this Christmas order for this retailer. And I hadn't been out selling. I hadn't been out planning our future. I was just trying to survive, get that done. I mean, isn't that the right thing? But really, I needed to find a way to keep at least one of those hands unstained from the blue. As patriotic as it was, let's call it, for me to be there shoulder to shoulder, stuffing sacks with my buddies and with my employees, our temp laborers, doing the hard work. Someone had to be out also working on the next. And I didn't have one hand on the next. So we scrambled. We went to the big furniture retailers in the West. We said, look how cool. We make these giant bean bags. They come shrunken down. We can now take their covers off. You can wash them, change them. And I remember these meetings, man. The first one with one of the biggest furniture retail chains in the West, the guy just like laughed at us and said, look, your name is ridiculous. Nobody wants this. You're embroidering these and putting it on the product, and nobody wants that logo in their home, this name. Nobody's going to pay $500 for a beanbag. We knew they would because we'd been selling them for 3 or 4 years now at college, etc. But this guy just wasn't having it. This buyer, this sophisticated furniture buyer. We drove to an even bigger one. We drove overnight to Colorado, and we had just invented shrinking sacks down into duffels, and we hadn't ever had, we didn't have that much experience with it. So we arrive at this sales meeting. It's 8 a.m. This big furniture chain that covers, a bunch of the Midwestern states. And this buyers, we have an appointment with them. We get introduced. We're reminded that this guy, buys millions of dollars in furniture every day as a furniture buyer, and really kind of snobby. And we drag these shrunken down duffels in, which are pretty cool. The idea that we could shrink these down to 1/8 the original size, but we went to untie the duffels and we couldn't get them untied because it was tied in a knot to keep the thing, and we just didn't plan ahead. So then we had to borrow some scissors to cut the duffel open, which wasn't exactly very cool to do on a sales meeting. And then this thing is just like a shrunken down raisin in a plastic bag laying there on the floor because it had been in the back of the truck all night, frozen, like through the long drive to Colorado, because we we drove through the night to make it to this meeting in time after getting the sack off the shredder. We were flying by the seat of our pants. And this thing wouldn't recover because it was just like cold, frozen, shrunken foam. So we're kicking it around. We're trying to wake it up. So we get the cover on it. This thing is totally floppy and looks terrible. And this guy's just shaking his head. And we're explaining to him, you can take the covers off and wash them. And, oh man, it was just so embarrassing. So embarrassing. And so dejected, we drove back home to Salt Lake. Needless to say, didn't make that sale. And 2 weeks later, we're filling a few sacks. We're winding things down. We're letting people go from the factory. No more work to be done. We have a few orders from friends, whatever we're completing. And we're at lunch one day trying to figure out what to do. And my phone rings. And, we'd already been by the way, to the shopping malls locally in Salt Lake, and they'd all laughed at us as well. They're like, look, we got Pottery Barn, Crate and Barrel, Restoration Hardware, like pottery, what's Lovesac? No one wants this name. Like, we don't even understand what you're trying to do. We wanted to open a store in their mall because no one else would sell our product. The malls rejected us. In fact, one of the spaces we wanted, they gave to the Christian Science reading room over us. But I'm at lunch one day with my buddies trying to figure out what to do. My phone rings and, I answer it in the classic way. Lovesac Corporation. And it's one of these malls, and they want to give us a space just for Christmas, just temporarily. So it's a brand new center. They had some empty spaces to fill for the grand opening. They'll let us in for the holidays and for the Winter Olympics that was coming to Salt Lake that year, 2002, the January, February, March of 2002. We'll let you in. Just please don't make us look bad. We max out my cousin's credit cards because mine were already maxed. Carpet, paint, neon sign, make the place look amazing. Open our first Lovesac store on November 17th, 2001 for that whole winter season. Hoping to just pay back my credit cards maybe. It's going to be me and my cousin working in the mall from open to close every day. We may even be able to pay ourselves, $10 an hour for the first time in our life since working at Lovesac, if we could make enough sales. And sure enough, we did. Couldn't believe it. People would come in, flop down, big smile on their face. And, every 50th person or so bought a sack. And it paid the bills. It paid back my credit cards. It blew up. And 10 days into it, people asking about franchising. And the rest is history. And it's a long story and it's a fun story. But it taught me the hard lesson. And even then, I made the mistake again. I worked on the floor of that store a little too long when I should have been standing back trying to figure out why it was working so we could do the next ones even better. So tragically, I had to learn this lesson a number of times. Keep one hand on the now and one hand on the next. And we're going to talk about it today with a guest who knows a lot about this and can unpack it even better than I can. Enjoy. With me today is perhaps the most successful female entrepreneur ever in the beverage category, which is a big deal because of the reach and scale of that particular space. She is one of Fortune's most powerful women entrepreneurs, Fast Company's most creative people in business, media mogul, former tech executive, mother of 4, even as she continues to motivate and inspire entrepreneurs through her own podcast, The Kara Goldin Show, The Undaunted. Kara Goldin.
Wow. Thank you so much for that nice intro.
Well, we try, but not hard with a background like yours. It's amazing. And, look, super fan. As you've seen, we drink hint in this home. We have for many years. So not a new thing around the Nelson family home, and really proud of what you created. Hard to believe it didn't exist, right? The best ideas are always kind of like, well, I mean, like that's been done. Like someone's done that, right?
Yeah. It's true across every single category. I find that it's, and there's just a zillion ideas out there. So I'm always encouraging people to just go find those ideas and figure out either it hasn't been done, or can you actually do it better?
Yeah. Well, look, in my case, like come on, like a giant beanbag, like the silliest of ideas. Of course, we've evolved into much more beyond that at this point. And actually, it's a perfect entree to today's Shawnism uh, little lesson that I learned the hard way. Keep one hand on the now and one on the next. See, for Lovesack, what had happened is we opened our first store on a wing and a prayer because we were a little side hustle through college. We got this big order at a trade show when I was ready to shut the business down. It's sort of like, if we can't get big business, we're done. Like, this has been bleeding me dry. We went to this trade show, credit carded our way there, got this big order, had to build a factory on credit cards, uh, loans from the government, loans from my parents, built the factory, completed the order, made no money, broke even, had all this debt still. We went to the big furniture companies to sell like our big giant bean bags where now the covers come off. You can wash them in the washing machine. Like, we just invented all that. You can shrink them down, ship them 1/8 their original size. And the furniture companies just laughed at us. Like, this is like, no one's going to pay $1,000 for a bean bag. Your name's ridiculous. No one wants that in your home. We embroider the name on the product. I mean, it's like really bold. And so my cousin said, well, all these places rejected us, the biggest of the big furniture buyers all around the West. And so my cousin said, well, let's open our own store. We went to all the malls. The malls laughed at us. We've got Abercrombie and Fitch. We've got the Gap. We got Pottery Barn. Like, what's Lovesack? And so they wouldn't even give us a space. And then one mall had called us back because they had rejected us, but they had a bunch of spaces to fill as a brand new center, Salt Lake City, Utah, opening for Christmas and the Winter Olympics. And they needed to fill some space. So they said, we'll let you in on a temporary basis. And then, after the Olympics, like in March or something, we'll get like a real client, a tenant. And, so there I was stuffing sacks in that factory we had built, but I had failed to have one hand on the next. I wasn't out selling. I wasn't out hustling. My hands were stained blue from stuffing that, 12,000 piece sack order. And I was put in this position where we scrambled and nearly just completely went out of business, tons of debt, would have let down that whole factory of people. Cause I didn't have one hand on the next, and it was a hard lesson. And had to learn it the hard way, as with all my lessons, apparently. So I'm just, as an entrepreneur, Kara, I've got to believe that you must have faced similar situations where you either focused too much on the now, stuffing sacks, as it were, or maybe too much on the next, on the future when the present might have been falling apart around you. I don't know, but that's been my experience many times over. I had to learn this lesson a few times. Anything come to mind in that realm?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many stories. So I'll share one that I've told a couple of times, but it is our exciting partnership with Starbucks. So we had wanted to get into Starbucks. Of course, that's like that's a badge, right? You get your product into Starbucks. Starbucks didn't have an investment in us. I mean, we basically were, pitching them to be in their cold box for a long time. And we ultimately got the product, got a yes. You have to understand that the beverage industry, for those who aren't familiar with it, there's over 2,000 beverages out there. And so it was a pretty big deal when we finally got a yes. And basically they wanted to do a little test with us and get us into, I think it was like 30 stores initially. We get a phone call right before the 30 stores were going to be launching. And they said, is there any way you can do 1,000 stores? So we're like, wow. Yeah. I mean, we had no idea how we were going to pull it off, but we were like, for sure. We're going to, at that point we were only in San Francisco, and we had actually just launched in New York as well.
And the answer has to be yes, right? Like, that call
Yeah,
comes.
totally.
Like, whether you're ready or
figure
not.
it out.
Yeah.
100%. We were going to figure it out. Right. And so right before they said, we're going to give you a couple extra weeks before we're going to launch so that you have enough time. And, we had to make sure that we were going to get enough product into all of these stores and not short ship any of them. And it was basically going to be not in every single Starbucks store, but it was going to be across the country. So in places like Chicago that, we didn't even have a distributor out there. We didn't know how exactly this was all going to work. But basically, we were going to ship directly into Starbucks and they were going to handle all the distribution. It was a beautiful thing. So just one flavor, the blackberry flavor. And so we launched.
This
Yeah,
one, the one I'm
exactly.
drinking right now.
I'm having blackberry as well right now.
Man.
So a day before, we're all ready. A day before this is all getting ready to ship, we get a phone call. We're always, you're always a little concerned about these phone calls. Like, why are these phone calls coming in? And they said, actually, is there any way we'll give you guys a couple more weeks, but we decided that we want to launch in all 6,000 stores.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So we're like, yes, on many, many levels. Right. We're launching in military. Starbucks is in a bunch of military bases just in the US. Very, very exciting. So the one thing I asked them, because we're trying to figure out exactly how to, plan for this, right? Like what is success? I thought it was fascinating because the buyer said, I've never had anybody ask, like, what is success? And I'm like, I want to know, like, how many do we have to sell in order for you to just be like, they're killing it, right? This is what success is. Because I want to understand, like, are you going to put us in 6,000 stores and then you're going to tell us, oh, you didn't sell enough, and then we're going to get kicked out. And they said, if you sell a bottle and a half per store per day, that is success. And I said, so by when? When do I have to sell a bottle and a half per store per day? And they said, as soon as possible, but like 6 months. So 6 months in, we were selling 3 bottles per store per day. So I'm like every day looking at the numbers and thinking, we're killing it, right? Like this business is amazing. A year and a half into this business, we were putting everything we had into this relationship and making sure that Starbucks was happy. We were getting, calls here and there from, the Krogers of the world and all the rest of the big retailers, but those just took longer to get into. But we were like, we're in Starbucks, we're killing it. Like, let's figure out how we go from, 3 bottles per store per day to like 6. So a year and a half in, we get a phone call from the new buyer. Lesson number 1, when you get a phone call from a new buyer, that new buyer always wants to put their footprint on something. It's very rare that they're going to just go status quo. Maybe they'll do that for a period of time, but especially, heads of revenue, heads of marketing, they want to come in and shine, right? And they're going to mix it up in some way. So we learned in 15 minutes of that, the first 15 minutes of that phone call, that they were discontinuing us.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm like, wait a minute, like we're doing 3 bottles per store per day and that's ramping. Are you sure you're talking about, have you seen the data on this? I mean, this is nuts, right? And she said, well, we're totally changing strategy. We are going to put sandwiches in the case. It's higher margin business, higher ring, all of this. Sounded great for them. And I'm thinking, how am I going to tell my investors? How am I going to tell my team that this business is going away? And I did not have options, right? I did not know what the heck I was going to do, right?
How much of your business was Starbucks at that moment, roughly?
40% of our overall, 40% of our overall business. And so,
oh man,
I was, I wanted to curse Howard Schultz out, and this buyer, like I was, and I didn't know what to say. I mean, I was speechless. I was really, really in a tough spot, right? I didn't have any data, to reach out to any of these consumers who had been buying our product when they're going into Starbucks stores. I mean, it was just, there were so many problems that I just had not focused on because I was focused on the three, right? The three
Yeah.
bottles per store per day, and success. That's how I was measuring success, not figuring out what else was going on in the business. So I'm a huge believer, sort of lesson number two, that it's okay to take a moment to feel sorry for yourself. Think, what the frick am I going to do at this point? And then really figure out what can we do at this point, and whether that means getting together with your team, or talking to some people that you trust, like how have you gotten through tough situations, whatever it is. So while I was going through that process for 2 weeks, and I had a bunch of products sitting in the warehouse that, by the way, they were not going to be purchasing, that was all going to go bad, and I had
Wow.
no idea what I was going to do. Uh, I get an email from a buyer at Amazon, and the buyer at Amazon said, "I buy your product at Starbucks every morning, and I love it. I'm launching the grocery business here at Amazon." They had a very small presence, but they wanted to put Hint in as one of the first products to launch on Amazon. So I give the guy a call. Actually, ironically, the way that he got my phone number and how he knew me was that my very first job right out of college in New York City was at Time Magazine. And he worked in the building at Sports Illustrated. He was a few years older than me, but he remembers me. And just as he said, I was funny. I was always really helpful. I was like making copies when they used to have copier machines or whatever.
Yeah.
I was always like wanting to be, super helpful and very approachable. And so he had heard that I had started his favorite product that he bought every single day. So, just through our network, ended up getting my phone number. Anyway, so he said, "Gosh, I wish I would have gotten a hold of you sooner because I really need the product tomorrow." And I
Oh
said,
man.
"I have an overrun of BlackBerry Hint, and if you can wire me the money, then it's yours. I'll get trucks this afternoon and get it to you guys." And he was like, "Oh my God, you totally saved me. We didn't have anything in the beverage category. This is amazing." Right.
Wow.
And so anyway, Hint very quickly became the most successful product in the category in within grocery, and then like the
Wow.
number one product in beverages as well. Uh,
Wow.
and literally that morning I woke up and didn't know what I was going to do, right? But I
Wow.
kept thinking, there is if there's a God out there, something's gonna happen. But I think there's so many lessons, but it goes back to one of the lessons, which is you never know when people are watching, right?
Yeah. Well,
And staying kind, staying helpful to people. You just never know, you know, when that's going to come back and be really helpful to you.
yeah, the chapter or Shawnism it reminds me of, because they all build on each other, of course, these stories. And I have one called in the book called "We Make Our Own Luck," and it was a concept shared with me by Richard Branson, who is kind of a mentor of mine. I won his reality TV show. It's like a long story. It's crazy,
Mm-hmm.
but
No, I remember. Yeah.
yeah, but your luck, I feel, was not just luck. Like, this took me a long time to kind of, at first when I heard that phrase, I didn't like it, because actually, as a person of faith, I just felt like, luck, like, come on, that's so, it's so dismissive. But anyway, long story short, you have a great product. Like Hint is, as you know, it's a fantastic product. It's legit. It's people love it for all the right reasons. And so this person loved both your product and you because you lived your life in a way that was lovable, likable, all those things. You made that luck that came into your inbox in the form of an email from Amazon that day. And it's like, so my question is, while both are requisite, both the ability to make luck in that way, at least, where, as they say, where preparation meets opportunity, but also this idea of having, keeping one hand on the now and one on the next. Because this is something I've reflected on. What do you think, Kara, you might have done differently now? Because the whole point of this book, Let Me Save You 25 Years, and the podcast, right, is like, man, I didn't need to learn this the hard way. Like maybe I could have listened to this podcast. Podcast didn't exist then.
Yeah.
Maybe I could have listened to something like this and had one hand on the now and one hand on the next. What do you think? Or is it even possible to conceive of? You're busily hustling with Starbucks, keeping your client happy, just trying to probably keep up with the growth. Is it conceivable that you could have somehow seen around that corner? Or did you later in your career, as you obviously handled lots of different clients at that scale, develop the ability to maybe hedge your bets, see around corners? Do you think there's anything that you could save 25 years to someone listening that you learned from all that?
Yeah. Well, so I touched on the fact that it was 40% of our overall business. And if you don't own that business yourself, that is 40% of your overall business, and you're relying on a partner that is holding on to 40% of your overall business that could go away overnight, that's stupid. Really stupid, right? Like that is something that, I learned. I was lucky, right? That phone call came in from the Amazon buyer, and, it all ended up okay. But it wasn't until almost a year later when I was up at the Amazon headquarters and, we were having a nice review of the overall business. And the gentleman said to me, the reason why we really like Hint a lot is that people are buying Hint and they're also buying products across categories, which we don't really see very often in this category. So people are buying Hint and they're buying, exercise items or tennis shoes that show that they're going to go off hiking, or diabetes monitors. So we're profiling, we're getting a better, clearer idea of who this consumer is that we aren't seeing with the other beverage companies that are listed on the site. And I said, oh, that's fascinating, because I started this business not because I was dying to start a beverage company, but because I wanted to get healthier. And I believed that there were a lot of people that wanted to get healthy as well. Can I reach out to a few of those consumers and have a conversation with them? And he said, does Starbucks give you the emails for these consumers? And I'm like, no. I said, but you're an online business. And he said, it doesn't matter. He said, you're not going to get these emails from us. And does Whole Foods give you the emails? And it was at that moment when I realized another thing about that business with Starbucks, that if I would have been able to have the emails for this business, I now had walked into an industry after living in tech for many years. I walked into an industry where I didn't have any data other than the fact that I was selling people product. I didn't really know who my demographic was. I was, all of these issues. So I remember getting on the plane from Seattle and coming back to the Bay Area where I live and thinking, how do I get the data? I start my own store. And I'm like, that is how I learn about this consumer. And so it's sort of full circle going back to Starbucks, because I wouldn't have had the product to be able to put that into Amazon. And
Right.
unless I got the data point from that Amazon meeting, it everybody in the beverage industry, this is 2012, no one was talking about having a store. In fact, everybody in the beverage industry was saying, why would you go direct? I mean,
Yeah.
no one's going to buy beverages online. That business became 40% of our overall business very
Wow.
quickly. People were saying,
And you control that business.
we control the business
Yeah.
and we act as a retailer. It's I mean, the reality is it's not necessarily more profitable because it's, you end up buying ads and doing lots of it and shipping on your own and all of these costs. But the big thing that you do have is you understand who your consumer is. And so if that business were to go away, at least you have the ability to reach out to consumers. So very different from the Starbucks journey, very different from the Amazon journey. In fact, we still sell a ton of water on Amazon, but again, like I think there's things that you learn uh, when you're outside of the business that you are not going to learn necessarily when you're sitting there
Yeah.
in the business. But I think the Starbucks one in particular, um, if I would have been able to have the data when they were making decisions for their business that allowed me to reach out to consumers, I should have been focused on not ever having the consumer or without ever having 40% of my business sitting in one spot. And frankly, I mean, that applies to uh, any partnership, any supplier, um, an employee. Whenever you've had that feeling over the years, like, somebody walks in the door and says, actually, I'm leaving. Um, and, they're controlling, I don't know, maybe they're your head engineer or whatever it is. Anybody like any great leader, I think, would say that uh, if they get blindsided by something like that, that it hits hard. But if you're not paying attention to a piece of business or people that mean that much to your business, whatever it is, you can sort of use the
Yeah.
same theory. If they're that important, then it's your fault.
Yeah. We recently, we recently had a brainstorm inside my own company of just all the things that can go wrong. Part of our annual strategic planning sessions, and I can only imagine. It'd be hard. It would have been hard at that moment, I'm sure, to conceive of like Starbucks. What do you mean? Like we're 1.5 bottles was their threshold. We're doing 3. It probably would have been hard for you to conceive of planning, or at least conceiving of them yanking the rug out from under you. But I think, a really disciplined strategic process. And this is something I've learned from my own partners who are frankly older and smarter than me. But I guess I've been at least smart enough to bring them on. But to go through these rigorous strategic processes where we brainstorm, the stuff that we may not want to imagine, but the stuff that we need to imagine possibly going wrong,
Mm-hmm.
strikes me as I listen to you. And also I love how, um, not only had you created the luck that you needed by doing all the right things throughout your whole career and with a great product, which is key, but, you know, you also came to recognize through those interactions some key fundamental issues with your model. Like, I love how you described your conversation with that person at Amazon, because I think that so many of these things, we learn the hard way by living the business. But many founders and entrepreneurs, like if you get an order from Starbucks or from Amazon, you're like, oh my gosh, like we're made. Then they
Yeah.
up the order from, 30 to 1,000 to 6,000. We're made. But in reality, you're making a huge, uh, what's the right word? You're creating like a huge risk, even as you're creating this huge opportunity, as you demonstrated. I appreciate you being so candid. you're also creating this huge risk, because you and I both know, Kara, even in the hundreds of millions, businesses can be just as fragile, maybe more so
Totally.
than, back when you were doing a million or two out of your basement, like I was, as a side hustle. Once you're in the tens and hundreds, you think all your problems will go away when you're somehow you clear 100 million, toward a billion now. Lovesac's approaching in annual sales, and the risks are only bigger in a weird
Yeah.
way, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's I mean, I have so many stories that come to mind even, around that. So that I don't want to talk your ear off about it, but it's
No, I mean,
there.
hey, Ty, hey, anything that'll save people a chunk of 25 years the hard way, that's what we're about.
Yeah,
Share
so
anything you want.
well, here's another one that happened right before the pandemic. It was end of 2019. We had an opportunity with Walmart. Everybody we were already in Target and killing it, and definitely kind of grew our business, I think, in the right way. Like, we had been in a lot of more influencer type of accounts, and we were having more and more people reaching out to us that they don't have a Target around them, or they don't we weren't in Starbucks anymore, even though Starbucks is on like almost every corner. But they could definitely buy it on Amazon. But there were a lot of people who shopped at Walmart, and we kept hearing it. And Walmart had invited us in for meetings over the years, and it's a big commitment to be able to be in Walmart. Basically, if you cannot, if you short ship them, you're going to be out of Walmart. So there were a lot of things, like, we didn't want to bite off more than we could chew, and
Yeah.
so we looked at our factories, and really started to kind of think about, with all the rest of our business going on, whether or not we could really handle it. And we decided that we could handle it if we actually bought some change parts for our machinery to automate some of it without, relying on people. If people were sick, or, basically, we don't own any of these factories. So we were also relying on people, them hiring these people fast enough, and then also that there weren't going to be any issues. Anyway, so we decided that we would buy some change parts in order to put them into some of our factories in order to go faster, so that we would be able to make sure that we were going to be able to fulfill the product for Walmart. We were also committing to Sam's Club and Aldi, which is another big, so a lot of business that was supposed to come in at the beginning of 2020. So got all the factories set, and we were ready to go. And everything's going in March 2020. So what happened in March 2020?
Wow.
So COVID hits. Everybody is sheltering in place. All of our factories are in the US. We don't do anything outside of the US. And we blow our own bottles. What always seemed like that's not the way that most beverage companies do business. Why aren't you guys getting cans or something from China? I mean, it ended up that everything was being done here, and we were doing less shipping we weren't buying from a bottle supplier in the US. We were blowing everything, and etc. So March rolls around, and we are a product that is an essential product. Do you remember hearing that word? Like, essential
Oh,
product. All the shelves were running out of water.
wow.
And many of the big beverage companies could not actually supply enough beverages, because they were relying on product to create their product from typically China. And so the factories were shut down. And so we were actually growing our business significantly, because they needed to fill these shelves, and we had enough product. We could keep running them. If we would not have thought ahead
Mm-hmm.
about the automation,
Mm-hmm.
we would not have been able to do what we were being asked to do, which was fill a whole bunch of shelves. And there
Wow.
were many beverage companies that were also running in the plants that we were running in that were not using the lines that had this automation that we had invested in order to
Yeah.
make things go faster. So we definitely scored in many ways. In April of 2020, we get a phone call. We had been trying to get into Costco. And the way that Costco sells, as I would imagine is regional, right? You've got all these different regions. We had been in different regions and sort of barely sold in a few regions and did okay. We just thought, like it'll happen when it happens. So Costco calls us and they said, we actually kind of remember you telling us that you do everything in the US. Is that true? And I said, yeah. And they said, so we want to put you in all warehouses like yesterday. And we have a big problem right now with a lot of beverage companies not being able to supply product. And so are you guys able to handle this? And I mean, massive. Like Costco does not do all
Yeah.
regions like fast. So here we had these major accounts that we had committed to. The product was selling and out of stock. It was insane. Um, and so if you ask anybody who, I mean, even if you're not in the beverage industry, if we should take on uh, in 6 months, should we take on Aldi, Sam's Club, uh, Walmart, and Costco and Target? Should we take all of those new customers on, or are we going to fail? And we went back to the team and we asked the team, like, what do you think? Can we really do this? Like, it's possible that we can pull it off, but what do you like? Should we do it? And everybody's like, yes, let's do it. Like, this is going to be amazing and it's all going to work. So we did. And we
Wow.
did, the impossible. And it's funny because I was interviewed by corner office and a few other people like, how did you know to automate? We didn't know, but we thought about what is it going to take to be successful, right? We thought about the future. We thought about, uh, what could go wrong here. And it ends up that if you think about what could possibly go wrong, when you are hit with massive surprises like COVID, like being an essential product where your factories have to run 24 hours a day, all of these things that we hadn't in normal times been dealing with. And when that Costco call comes in to be in every single warehouse, you're able to say yes,
Yeah.
to that business. Um, and, it was, I mean, it was crazy. It was
Yeah.
absolutely insane.
Yeah. I love that you shared this. I think just a couple points I was writing down as you were speaking, because I think they're valuable. One, listening to you, you had clearly somehow learned something from, as you've gone, as you should, right? And you really were having one hand on the next as you conceived of the automation, as you conceived of, even on principle building in America. Sometimes, one of the little lines in the book that I talk about is if you are operating on on principle, don't be surprised when you land where the puck is going. So in your
Mm-hmm.
case, there's that famous Wayne Gretzky quote, right? Like skate where the puck is going. And I believe very firmly that when you are operating on principle, in your case, like, hey, we're going to do this in America. It's the right thing to do. It's good for these number of reasons. Then something like COVID hits, which for us at Lovesac was terrifying because, and so I'm going to tie a few things together here from what you had to say, like back to the business model. We at Lovesac to this day, we do business in Costco, but we only do pop-up shops. So we control all of it. We have zero distribution. we are connected with every customer we've ever sold to directly, ever. Now, that has its cons too. When COVID hits, we have, 80% of our sales though occur in our showrooms because, at the end of the day, people explore our stuff online, but it's like an $8,000 couch. Like I got to sit on this thing. And then while they're in there, they purchase. Well, when you're basically told by the world at large, you need to close all of your showrooms. That's 80% of your business tomorrow. And you need to still be on the hook for all those leases. And do you really want to fire all your employees? Lay them off. And of course, we made the decision not to, at least the managers, because they're like lifers and they're our family. And so we're terrified. It's terrifying. Here you are in the hundreds of millions. You talk about big risk. You're on the hook for all this expense. 80% of your sales might be to zero. And then the next thing you know, just like you, because of the principal decisions we had made in our supply chain to diversify into numerous countries, we weren't just China beholden. We had numerous sources for everything. So like we were able to avoid all the COVID closures one way or another, shuck and jive, do all this stuff. Next thing you know, COVID turns out to be we were not an essential product, but we were the next best thing. We were like the place in your living room, you were stuck. And as it turns out, we couldn't have predicted it, but COVID turned out to be a huge tailwind for the home category. Like who could have predicted that? Yeah. And so, but we were ready because of the principal decisions we had made in our business model, in our supply chain, et cetera. Like we diversified just on principle, just because we believed in it. We were paranoid. We lived with paranoia. After all the crap I lived through, not keeping one hand on the next, kind of like you, we now had more paranoia driving our existence, and thankfully, even though we did not have paranoia around a global pandemic, that wasn't on our list, but the other paranoias shaped our business in a way that, again, set us up to have made our own luck when COVID hit and be ready. And we never ran out of stock through all of COVID. We grew like a maniac. I mean, we have like a 4 or 5 year, 40% CAGR, compounded average growth rate, at scale, approaching now like $750 million in sales at that growth rate. Right. So my point being, you and I probably both learned the hard way how to keep one hand on the now and one hand on the next. And that is a lesson that I so desperately want to pass on to people that maybe can save a chunk of 25 years by not having to necessarily learn it themselves. But that's a fantastic story. I appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah. I think that the other lesson in there too is that putting stakes in the ground around things that are really important to you, and for us, really, there was no beverage companies around us. There, not many today either that really were emphasizing local and trying to think differently around an industry. And my husband, who has been the chief operating officer for Hint since the beginning, I mean, he was really like looking at, this whole trucking industry. He knew nothing about the trucking industry, but he was like, there's all these backhauls where people are not using it. I mean, can we call these guys up and like get a backhaul, and that where these trucks are typically empty, and figure out how do we take advantage of those at a lower cost? Or, can we actually make sure that we're setting up our plants and relationships with plants in areas that are closest to our distribution points, the Whole Foods of the world, whatever, so that there's not a lot of gas that's being used. And people are like, why don't you just like get bottles in China or in, Mexico or wherever it was. And we really looked at it as like, from a sustainability standpoint, we really thought like that didn't necessarily make sense. In fact, in a perfect world, we thought that step between creating a bottle and actually filling a bottle, how do we do away with that? And I think that's been kind of the ethos of how we've thought about things. And I think actually coming from outside of an industry, I've talked to a ton of entrepreneurs about this. You just naturally think differently because you're not used to growing up in an industry and, learning how it's supposed to be done. And so
Yeah.
you start thinking like, why is it being done that way? I mean, one of the things that uh, we still haven't totally fixed, but the whole idea of boxes, we all saw in COVID, everybody's garbages were, overflowing with all of these boxes. And, you know, do we really need boxes?
Yeah.
And for a lot of this product, and it it really is kind of an interesting. I mean, I guess they stack better inside of trucks, but I don't know. Like I think that there's a lot of trees that are getting cut down for those boxes. You can talk
Yeah.
about, recycled products. Okay, that's fine. But at the end of the day, there's trees that are getting cut down for boxes,
Yeah.
and you can uh, argue your way out of that. I guess if you're a company saying you feel good about it and it comes from recycled, but okay, somewhere along the way, this is what
Yeah.
happened. And I think that there's just things like that, that if you start to think differently about it, you might be able to save costs, but also do what's right. And don't be afraid to kind of think differently and not follow the norms, because you could actually develop something that can be helpful to not only your industry, but other industries too.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the book, I call this micro chapter "Mind the Experts," meaning, you hire experts to help you do stuff at a high level. At the same time, you're told by the experts in the category, usually, oh, we've done that. We've tried that. This is how you need to do it. Like you said, all the people that told you just get bottles in China. That's how, and so when you come in from the outside, it's almost like you're just dumb enough to say, well, why not? Why can't we do it
Mm-hmm.
this way? And that's what always has made us successful, is trying, frankly, to stay dumb enough that we don't just adopt the tried and true answers. We're always willing to challenge the answers to the questions that have already been answered by the industry. Like, oh, that'll never work. I was told by so many people through the prototyping process, like, Sactionals will never work. They're probably the best selling couch in the United States of America. And these are the experts, right? And they wouldn't work for good reason. Like, this is why, the angles of the seat and this and that. My point being, again, all these things, all these kind of true principles tie together. And I appreciate you bringing it up. One of them that gets unpacked inside of keeping one hand on the now and one hand on the next is this idea of working on the business, even as you're working in the business. And you demonstrated that so well. Like you said, your husband challenging the shipping, you all trying to automate, even as, you could have just tried to keep up with the orders and done it like with brute force, but you're really working on the business, and that comes at an expense, right? Of just kind of working in the business. And I think that's a phrase that's kicked around a lot, but I think is honestly kind of thrown around too much, and people don't quite understand. I was curious how you demonstrated that on the business. Do you see any connections for people who are not entrepreneurs? People working a job,
Mm-hmm.
maybe inside of your business, that can still be thinking about this idea of keeping one hand on the now, one hand on the next, working on their job, even as they're working in their job. Is there a way that can be useful to people who are not just founders or entrepreneurs, do you think? You ever thought about that?
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think whether or not your role as an entrepreneur, or you're you're just trying to make things better. I mean, for example, the direct to consumer business I had prior to starting Hint, I had actually uh, launched the direct to consumer business at America Online and helped grow that business with a whole team of people to over $1 billion in revenue. And when I left America Online, I assumed that I was a technology executive. That's what everybody, all the headhunters were calling me to, because I was a early days of e-commerce, we called it, not direct to consumer. And I wanted to do something else, because I'm like, I don't even know how I got into tech. And now I'm an expert, right? Like, it's sort of crazy. I want to go back down to the bottom and learn a whole new industry. And, stumbled upon this idea for Hint. But few years later, when we decided to launch the direct to consumer business, everybody was like, well, I mean, you've run direct to consumer businesses, but it was different. There was like a lot of technology that had come in, and I didn't, I was meeting with different suppliers and different companies that were doing things, um, but I wasn't confident that I really knew what to do. And so I looked outside of my industry, at, companies that were doing things that I thought were really innovative. And one of the companies that I reached out to was Warby Parker. And I thought that this whole idea of like a subscription, right? That was the one that, in the eyeglass industry. And that was, one that I thought was like really bold, really risky. I was even finding myself saying it's never going to work. But it was working. Right. And so I started to like look at some of these companies that I guess, were not, most people I think would look in an industry that they're in, right? They'd be
Yeah.
looking around at the beverage industry. Nobody was doing what I wanted to do. Right. And
Yeah.
I sort of 80% of me knew what I wanted to do, but another 20% I thought I still am learning. Right. And so I need to look outside of the industry. You were the same way. You needed to look outside of your industry and start to pull these pieces together to create what you ultimately wanted to do. So you don't necessarily need to be a founder to do that. Right. You can
Yeah.
actually be inside of a company and come up with, a great idea to challenge what you're doing in order
Yes.
to grow a company. And, you're a hero, right?
Yeah.
If you're able to do that.
Yeah. Look, I think whether you're in accounting and you care enough about your career to make connections across your profession and have, go to some of these uh, conferences, meet people that do what you do in other categories though, develop mentors, learn new practices, whether you're in marketing and, and part of keeping one hand on the now and one on the next is reading every day, keeping up with what's
Yeah,
going on in the
totally.
world. Like you're being perceptive about Warby Parker, unrelated to you. It's eyeglasses, right? And their business model. And, hey, could something there be useful to us in the beverage world? That is the kind of connection that anyone can make in their career, functional or developmental inside of a company. And I think that, or as an entrepreneur, of course. And so I think like fantastic connection. We could go on this topic forever. I want to be respectful of your time though, Kara. Look, just to wind us up, is there anything, I mean, you've shared so much already, is if you were to give one piece of advice to save someone, on their 25-year journey, a chunk of time, something, masterful, just something, or something that came from today that you'd summarize, is there anything that you would tell, maybe the younger you or just someone trying to save a bit of trouble by learning from maybe your mistakes instead of their own?
Yeah, I think that the key thing, and you and I talked about this earlier. I have, 4 kids that are starting out in the world, and I think it's wake up and think about what you want to do, and know that that could change, right, along the way. And most of the most interesting people that I know, uh, had clearly bumps in the road along the way, but also a lot of them changed industries. I did not, I graduated from school with a journalism major. If you would have asked me when I was 21, I wanted to write. I wanted to,
Hmm.
I wanted to work at Fortune magazine and be and write columns. The world has, changed significantly in terms of the content world, for sure. But I never thought I was going to be a tech executive. I didn't think that I was going to be an entrepreneur. I didn't even know what that word was, right? Like I did know what it was, but it wasn't like something that I aspired to be. So just today, figure out what you want to be doing, that you're going to enjoy, that you're going to be excited to wake up. And I think that the other thing is surround yourself with people that that support you. and that you love and that you enjoy working with. And I know you've done that really, really well,
Yeah.
because, you know, things can surprise you in the journey, and, you know, being able to go back to those people when you have challenges along the way. And certainly entrepreneurs, you have a lot more than you'll ever anticipate. It takes a lot longer than, you know, the average new entrepreneur thinks it's going to take to build a company, a really successful company. So I think it's, the key thing is really, you know, enjoying what you're doing. And if you're not enjoying what you're doing, then you shouldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, I talk about that in the book. You know, if you're going to get on a bus, make sure it's the right bus if you can, and filled with good, honest people that you want to be there with. And so I appreciate, that's fantastic advice. You know, it's easy to just get on the sexiest bus or the fastest bus or whatever, but it's an undervalued concept to, you know, if you're going to burn 25 years, burn it with people you can at least like. They don't have to be your best friends, but that's what great advice. Anything you want to plug, anything going on? I mean, your book Undaunted is amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's still,
How,
it's going on. It's, you know, going on 2 years and since it came out, and it's still doing really, really well. So it's exciting. I probably have book number 2 that yeah, so could come out. Lots of new stuff on the horizon, but my podcast, as you were on, you had a great episode, but I interview a ton of different incredible entrepreneurs. I'm on episode 430 now, so 430, which is insane. I know. And, you know, I think part of the reason, somebody was asking me this question 6 months ago, and I think part of the reason why I love doing the podcast is I love entrepreneurs. And I love learning, and I love, you know, hearing the battle stories. Right. And I hear, I remember these stories too, you know, and it's, you know, I think I always want to be learning, whether it's, you know, reading, or for me, just hearing these stories. And that's what the podcast has ended up to be. It's now in the top 1% of entrepreneur podcasts in the world, which is crazy. And I think more than anything, it's just every one of these podcasts is just, you know, it's not, I have a little bit of conversation that I have just because I'm an operator and I'm able to have those back and forth like what you and I are doing. But it's really, really fun for me to hear these stories and hear the creativity and everything that people, the challenges that people go through. And no matter what industry, it's like there's so many consistent threads that are talked about. So,
well, thank you. Look, I'm humbled to have participated in your podcast. We will humbly accept any shout outs as we get off the ground with our different take on it, but really appreciate that. Appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can follow Kara, as I do, on social media at Kara Goldin. That's Goldin. Or find the Kara Goldin Show on YouTube or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Her Wall Street Journal and Amazon best-selling book called Undaunted is an amazing read with all kinds of similar lessons from her own story, building the now ubiquitous Hint brand of flavored water that you can, of course, find everywhere, to the fountain of founder podcasts, the Baron of Beverages, the Highness of Hint. Thank you, Kara Goldin, for your time, your wisdom, and your undaunted spirit. So grateful.
Thank you so much. Thank you.